The point is, if you didn't have anyone to tell you what emotions were when you were growing up, first of all, your body would be significantly less able to regulate itself. Like the fact that we understand our emotions as well as we do is really effective for our regulation processes. That's the point. That's why we would end up here in an evolutionary path. But without that type of understanding, we wouldn't be able to recognize emotions as easily because we weren't taught the different patterns of emotion. And we learned through not just our own understanding and someone telling us what we're experiencing in a moment, but we see it in stories when we see the character is afraid of something that's about to happen. And that gives us a sense of like, okay, when we're in this type of situation, we might be feeling an emotion that is similar to what they're feeling, and we can call it what they're going to call it, what they're calling it on screen right now, which is fear. And that gives us so much information. That's so helpful for us. There's never anything that's just innate in this view. Like we can't think of anything as like being truly ontologically prior to our internalized understanding. That's why predictive processing is so powerful here. It's everything. Prediction is everything. And then the bottom-up signals tell us when our predictions are not right. If I was never told about fear, I wouldn't feel fear. It depends what you mean by feel fear. Like your body would do similar things, but you wouldn't be able to as effectively understand what is happening with the body. That's the point. So this is why I keep mentioning the predictive processing stuff. The bottom-up signals would be similar, but your bottom-up signals hit something that's applying prediction almost immediately. And as we pointed out, what's applying prediction often happens before the bottom-up signals hit it. Like it's already expecting some signal to happen. And this is also a great way to segue or to point back, go full circle back to what we were talking about with consciousness and other species. Like the other species might not be able to understand the complex emotions. There's one distinct separation that Barrett makes that is vital for your understanding of the rest of the book. Affect, the foundation. Simple feelings of pleasant, unpleasant, and arousal, calm. Barrett argues many species have this because it comes from body budgeting. Emotion, complex categories like sadness, awe, fear. These are constructed by the brain using concepts learned from culture. So yeah, if you didn't have that understanding, or if you didn't have the capacity for that understanding, let's just say. So imagine a chicken as it's being carried to the slaughter, like literally. It's experiencing something. The body is doing something that happens to all mammals. The parts of its brain that are applying top-down signals are applying signals that are so much lower fidelity than our top-down signals. Like our understanding of fear as this concrete category is not what a chicken can do as effectively. And so like it might just understand something bad is happening, but it wouldn't be able to differentiate these emotions as easily. I think we disagree because you don't believe consciousness has universal aspects to understand. Is this accurate? Oh man, this is a tricky conversation because like we share a culture. So I could say like within our culture, there's probably patterns that given what our culture provides us, there's patterns that we could both identify and that we could say that's universal. We could say that's transcendent in some aspect, but it's relying on the fact that we have a similar understanding about what fear is and whatnot, that we can actually notice these similar things happening. And you could say these are universal aspects to understand. I'm just trying to say, like, let's not think that these are like absolute ontological truths, but that these are like, I don't know, cultural and circumstantial, but also like they'll always occur with human DNA and these human experiences. So like that's the type of precision I'm trying to get at. But yeah, like this is the same point as when we talk about how different moral themes come to be in cultures, across cultures that don't ever coordinate with each other. It's like, yeah, it's likely that different cultures are going to arrive at similar takeaways about meditation because regardless of your language, whatever you designate as joy in your language is going to be the thing that how you make sense of this type of signal that is coming from your body when you do these certain things. And these signals are human in nature. It's in our DNA that this would happen when you meditate in this way. And so you could see these similar patterns, these similar conceptualizations across cultures. Yeah, when we arrive at these types of things, the question is, would we say that they're actually, fundamental in the fact that they're transcendent across cultures for humans? And because I'm trying to be as careful in a philosophical sense in this document, I'm not going to leverage the use of the phrasing of some absolute truth. It's not like there's an absolute truth about these meditative states, because I'm trying not to imply something. That's it. Really just comes down to this linguistic pragmatism at the end of the day, every single time. And I know that shoots me in the foot, but it's also the most careful we can be, and it's allowing me to not imply things that I wouldn't want to imply. But that it also gets me into this situation where you might be thinking I'm not actually agreeing with the aspect of this that you understand. So I think we're in agreement in terms of what mindfulness meditation can bring about for any human being that does it. What I'm always just concerned about is how we talk about that type of phenomenon. I was just randomly reading the main Theravada authority, and he said direct experience is the highest level of proof. That's an attitude you see. Right, so this is the thing I specifically try to assault in the consciousness P2, because people will come up with axioms like this and build a lot on those axioms, and the question is, does it really matter? And that's a good question. I think it matters for the type of discussion we're having in our document and the type of discussion we have on this channel of being absolutely as philosophically precise as we possibly could be regarding what we know about the brain. What am I going to? I'm going to the ontological takeaways. Yeah, it's the same stuff. We can say that consciousness is the source of each individual's unique ontology, source of all meaning for them. However, we cannot say that anyone's unique experience directly pertains to some external absolute truth. And this is out of principle. We don't want to purport that there's some authority that's just kind of out there. We may share a similar biology, but each person's nature and nurture differs enough such that these experiences are different meaningfully. They're people have different meaningful experiences, and those experiences differ. All right, similarly, our interpretation of consciousness today radically differs from humans from 5,000 years ago. The conceptualization of a hard problem of consciousness, blah, 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 blah. Okay. So any conceptualization we have, even about consciousness itself, is fundamentally speculative and contingent. And I say fundamentally because I'm trying to really point out that we shouldn't take this as a an actual invitation for some sort of epistemic nihilism, but I'm saying it's fundamentally speculative and contingent. In the same way that we don't experience the physical world directly, we don't experience consciousness directly. Crucially, this means that we cannot rely solely on intuitive, self-evident features of experience as metaphysical bedrock, even if they feel logical. In other words, we cannot use the intuitive contents of an experience as evidence for that content's truth, regardless of whether that thought feels self-evident, such as the universe feels conscious or my mind feels separate from my body. So, and then, this reveals a primary point of divergence from many non-physicalist views. Frameworks like IIT and analytic idealism, for example, rely on the same epistemological starting point, what you had just mentioned. The Cartesian idea that consciousness is the only thing that we can be 100% certain of. They then elevate this one subjective intuition to the status of a primary, non-negotiable axiom that forms the metaphysical bedrock for their entire theory. Right? Even arguments built on pure logic ultimately depend on the feeling of conviction they produce. Our sense of what is logical or self-evident is not a pure window into truth, but a complex affective and cognitive state produced by our underlying physiology, shaped by our memory, language, and cultural context. For instance, how do you refute the idea that consciousness has the character of always changing? Yeah, so the thing that I would refute isn't the intuitive conceptualization of that. I think that having that understanding is actually quite beneficial. It's like I'm just trying to just point out that framing isn't without our cultural contingency, what we've internalized, understood, like our understanding of change, our understanding of what consciousness could be, the fact, like, what does it mean for consciousness to be changing? Like, all these things rely on presupposition that I just want to make sure are clear, like that they're in this story. We're not, and so yeah, like I'm not saying that we can't give anything a property in some determinate way. Like that, if we have a concept of consciousness, that would be the property. But it's much more inappropriate to say that like consciousness is true in some authoritative sense, that it's above anything else that we describe as true, and this is the one thing we know to be true. Like that's it has more implication power or weight. It implies more, and especially more than we would want to imply, or at least more than I want to imply. Like, I think it's important to point out the fact that consciousness feels certain, it feels true. Like that's certainly an interesting aspect of consciousness, not one that we should just shy away from. I think it is beneficial to understand consciousness as always changing. Like, it's a really useful axiom to operate with. Just like I think it's really beneficial to think about your consciousness as thoughts arising and going away, and it's not like a space, like we don't know, like it's hard to pinpoint where something is. It's not something we're looking at, because as like Sam always says, like, try to find the looker, and that's very difficult. So it's all these are useful conceptualizations. So I'm all about conceptualizations. It's when we start saying what things are, like when things are true in some fundamental sense, that I start getting up in arms. This naturally leads to the crucial idea: if all our convictions are contingent brain states, why should we privilege the conviction we feel for the scientific physicalist framework over any other? The answer must lie in a discernible heuristic, and it's the standards of empirical science that it's faith, right? Like we're relying on this understanding that is completely contingent about what leads to more authoritative conceptualizations about the world. So only with my understanding of empirical science giving us this sense of what is physically there, can I actually get a refutation of that core idea. It's only once I see that the brain is this dynamic under the hood that allows me to realize that my experience of solipsism is afforded to me by my affective parts of the brain, or brain processes. The reason I feel like something is true, even about consciousness itself, can be pinpointed to the types of processes that are happening in my brain. And because of that, that's as much refutation as I need. And when I say that, I mean, like, that's all the refutation that I believe that logic and empirical science necessitates. That's the type of argument I make. I would argue that you feel as certain that I am holding a pen right now as you are feeling that you are conscious right now. Like, I think it's a similar amount of affect is happening, or a similar arousal and valence is happening. Didn't Descartes say, like, everything physical could be illusory? It could be, right? But like, I imagine that your brain does not think that this is illusory. What you're doing when you're considering that it could possibly be illusory is you're applying this like high level, top down thought onto your what would be very much automatic. Like the argument I'm trying to make is, like, when you're walking up the steps, the certainty that you feel about the step in front of you is so uninteresting and is so innate that it doesn't even, like, I would even argue that if we're talking about the feeling of certainty, that is more certain to you than when you consider your consciousness. Because when you're, like, when you behave as if you just act as if something's there, if we're going to describe what certainty is, I would say that is significantly more unconscious and automatic than you having to think about consciousness. Like, consciousness is something that requires a little bit more thought than your automatic action, right? Like, our brain is wired to literally commit to things in the moment. That's the strength of this conceptualizing our understanding section. And we haven't talked through this in a while, but this stuff is so crucial. So huge, because it has us thinking about these types of unconscious interactions with the world as implicit commitments to how the world is in like a ontological sense. Like, that's a way that we could think about how our brain works. And through the predictive processing mechanism, that's literally how the brain is described. Like your brain is, when I say predicting something, it's committing to the world being that way. It's applying priors, and then the world, you could say the world, the external world, whatever you want to say. You could say it's, simply exteroceptive signals and interoceptive signals. Like this applies your pushback. This is the error that's telling you that the way that you think the world is not right, and a lot of that happens unconsciously. And if your brain determines that it's salient enough to require a bunch of other things to happen in your brain and body, then it will do that.